We're continuing from chapter 5, okay? Fing isn't in the dictionary, she whispered. Oh, for goodness sake, exclaimed father. Shh, shushed Mrs. Meek, pointing to a sign that her husband himself had put up, which read, silence. Sorry, he mouthed, before continuing in hushed tones. That doesn't mean there is no such thing as a Fing. There are thousands and thousands of books in the library. Surely one of them must mention a Fing. But what book should we look at next, father? Well, let's think, mother. What does a Fing sound like to you? Both went into deep concentration. A rood-shaped vegetable, guessed mother, searching for the big book of rood-shaped vegetables. An annoying board game, suggested father. A very distant planet, said mother. Books, books and more books tumbled off the shelves. Books about the human body, books about motor cars, books about flowers, books about antiques, books about books. Could a Fing be that thing that's left in your plug hole after a bath, suggested father. An unidentifiable item of clothing that you find in the tumble dryer, guessed mother. Guesses were volleyed back and forth like tennis balls. Something sticky. You find up your nose that isn't a bogey. A mysterious stain. The gangly bit of a jellyfish. A prize from a Christmas cracker that you never actually work out what it is. Something you find stuck to a dog. That dangly bit of your belly button that looks like the end of a balloon. The fluffy stuff you find between your toes. The opposite of a fong, exclaimed Mrs. Meek. What's a fong? asked Mr. Meek. I don't know, she replied, downcast. Hours passed until the exhausted pair had searched through every single book in the library. Just as they were about to admit defeat and brace themselves for the wrath of their daughter. Wrath means when that she's going to be angry with them. Mrs. Meek had a thought. There is one last place we haven't looked, she said. Where? Where? He asked eagerly. The ancient vaults of the library. That's where all the old books are kept. We might find a clue down there. Mr. Meek gulped. But, Mrs. Meek, we librarians are strictly forbidden to go down to the vaults. Everybody is forbidden. Nobody has been down there for 100 years. And I think that is the door to the vaults. And it says, do not enter over the top. Looks like a very old door. Chapter 6, Two Evils. Well then, we can't go down into the vault, said Mr. Meek, and that's that. Mrs. Meek was not taking no for an answer. But what about our darling daughter? If we don't get her a Fing, there will be tears before bedtime. Oh, yes. The man turned deathly pale at the thought. His eyes rolled back and he wobbled. Are you quite all right, Mr. Meek? But before he could reply, Mr. Meek fainted. Mrs. Meek went to catch him, but they both tumbled backwards and landed on the floor. Oof! She exclaimed as her husband landed on top of her. An old man stepped over them to reach a gardening book. The pair smiled politely up at him. Good morning, they said. Are you all right under there, Mrs. Meek? Inquired Mr. Meek. Yes, are you all right? Me? Yes, you fainted. Did I? Yes. Oh dear indeed. Let me help you up. No, let me help you up. This went on for quite a while, until finally both of them were on their feet. Now the pair had to choose between two evils. Either they went down to the spooky vaults of the library, or they faced the wrath of their daughter. What do you think they'd choose? What would you choose? The lesser of the two seemed to be the vaults. I don't think we have a choice, said Father. Then follow me, replied Mother. Mrs. Meek led her husband to a battered old door in the far corner of the library. Cobwebs covered the cracks, and a sign over it read, "Do not enter." Will it be dark down in the vaults? He asked, his voice wavering. Oh yes, pitch black, to protect all the old books, she replied. Well then, ladies first. Me? protested Mrs. Meek. They were both scared of the dark. I insist, he pressed. I insist. I am a gentleman. I have to let a lady go first. No, that's very old-fashioned these days, Mr. Meek. You should definitely go first. No, you. The pair had reached something of a standoff. I know, let's both go together, announced Mrs. Meek. Good plan, replied Father. He took down the rusty old key that was sitting on top of the door frame. Looking around to check that no one was watching, he unlocked the door. Creak! He fumbled for his wife's hand, and together they slowly descended the stairs. It's not too bad, is it? asked Mrs. Meek. No, stammered Mr. Meek. Chapter 7. Ancient, Obscure and Bizarre. To his relief, Mr. Meek found a candle and a box of old matches halfway down the stairs. His hands trembling uncontrollably, he passed them to his wife, who struck a match and lit a candle. The flickering light illuminated shelves and shelves of dusty old leather-bound books. The library vaults were a treasure trove of titles that were ancient, obscure and bizarre. There were thousands of books down there, all of them long out of print. Poisonous cheeses of the British Isles, terrifying tales for children, paintings of puddles, cats crying at Christmas, cooking with rare birds' eggs, disgusting diseases for dogs, a short history of socks, a long history of socks. One by one, Mr. and Mrs. Meek pulled the books from the shelves. With just a candle to read by, they searched millions upon millions of words for any reference to a Fing. Just as they were about to lose all hope, Mr. Meek thought he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. What was that? He whispered. What was what? She asked. Something moved. Maybe it was a rat. I hate rats. With the candle, Mrs. Meek illuminated a dingy corner of the vault. Indeed, something was moving underneath a pile of old newspapers. Rustle, rustle, rustle. She pushed her husband towards it to investigate it further. Go on. I am going. Lift up the newspapers and see, suggested Mrs. Meek. No, after you. Oh, for goodness sake, let's not start all that again. Reluctantly, Mr. Meek lifted the old damp sheets of paper. To his surprise, all that was underneath was a book. It's a book. Books can't move, she replied. This one did. What is it called? Mr. Meek peered down to study the spine. The title sent chills through him. It's called the Monsterpedia. Sounds like a book that's going to have different kinds of monsters in it. Part 2, the Monsterpedia. The next chapter is called Chapter 8, an encyclopedia of monsters. Mr. and Mrs. Meek set the book down on a rickety old table. Thud. The Monsterpedia was a huge leather-bound tome that must have been printed at least a few hundred years ago. It was, as the title suggested, an encyclopedia of monsters. Mrs. Meek blew dust off the cover and opened it. Might this book hold a clue to the existence of a Fing? It was the Meeks' final hope. The book was, as far as anyone knew, the only one of its kind in existence. Inside, it was an alphabetical list of terrifying creatures that were either long extinct or assumed to be mythical, with lavish hand-painted illustrations of these creatures on the opposite page. Neither Mr. nor Mrs. Meek had seen or heard of any of them before. First, there was an argadong-dong, a man-eating underground bird. I'm going to stop for today, okay? And why don't you have a think about what else they might find in this encyclopedia of monsters? And if you think they will find a Fing, what do you think it will look like? Okay, see you next time.